Vice Minister of Commerce and Deputy China International Trade Representative Mr. Wang Shouwen, and Mr. Yan Dong, DG of the Department of World Affairs in Trade. First of all, the floor is given to Mr. Wang Shouwen. Thank you very much. Friends of the media, good morning. Between the 20th and 22nd of October, WTO has accomplished its 8th TPR of China via video. This is a very successful TPR, and today we're about to brief you the basic information about WTO's 8th TPR of China, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this press conference. TPR, or the Trade Policy Review, is one of the 3 major functions of the WTO. The other 2 is the terminal settlement and negotiations. For the settlement of the conflicts, this function is affronting a lot of challenges, and for that function of the negotiations, we also have encountered some challenges. But what is a good news is that the 3rd function, the TPR, is working very well. With TPR, we can ensure that the trade policies of the member countries of the WTO can stay very transparent, and we can avoid the misunderstandings and also avoid the possible future conflicts in trade. So with the TPR, we can protect and support the multilateral trading system with WTO. After China's entrance into WTO since 2001, we have attached great importance to the TPR, and for every session of TPR, we worked very hard to organize all the stuff, and we answer each question posed by the other member states of WTO. This is also a way that we fulfill our promise to WTO, and this can also show our high attention attached to TPR. I myself personally have participated into 4 times of TPR of WTO of China. Most of the TPR would be run in Geneva, but this time, considering the COVID-19, we are running this 8th TPR with a video link. There are several characteristics of WTO's TPR. First of all, China has already gone through multiple times of TPR. We have 9 transitional TPR and 8 times of official TPR. We have actually experienced the greatest number of TPR. And for the U.S., after its entrance into WTO, they have in total experienced 9 times of the TPR. And the second characteristic is that we have received the greatest number of the questions from the member states. Each time we can break the record. For example, this time we have received from 39 member states, in total 2,562 questions. And for the U.S. last time, it's only 1,700. So this time, you can see that China received much more questions compared to the U.S. side. And then the third characteristic, we have recognized a huge diversity in the questions received. For example, questions about the goods trade, the IPR protection, and also investment, etc. We have attached great importance to that. In 2002, we have already established a body with more than 60 departments from the government's authorities, and we have all those personnel in this body, in this committee, to answer the questions from WTO. And this time, between the 29th of September to the 16th of October, the first phase of answering questions, we have already answered more than 2,100 questions. And during the National Day holiday, we haven't stopped our work. We can fully understand the attention shared by the member states to our country. After the 6th of October, we still received many more extra questions. So we have to complete the questionnaire within the 1 week after the 19th of October. Today, we have already applied so many questions with a total amount of words calculated in Chinese and English of 400,000. Mr. Wang Wentao, leading the delegation, has responded to questions in the WTO via video link. He has mentioned that China has offered a great number of opportunities for development of the world. We have also contributed to the world's economic growth. And secondly, over the past 2 decades, after the entrance into WTO, China has fulfilled its commitments and engagements, and we always support firmly the multilateral trading system of WTO. And with its own actions, China has supported the international fight against the COVID-19. And also, during this event, we have also introduced the development of China's economic and trade policies since the last TPR, that means the 7th TPR. This time, during the conference, representatives from 65 member states have also shared with us their comments. They are highly appreciating China's efforts and contributions. For example, China's active participation in WTO's work and China's fulfillment of its engagement, China's participation in the negotiations about the fishing policies and also the electronic commerce. And second, international arena has highly appreciated China's effort and contribution to the international fight against the COVID-19. And also, they are supporting China to further move forward with the sharing of the TPR of the vaccine. And also, they have firmly appreciated China's effort in helping the least developed countries, and also China's improvement with its negative list for market access and China's efforts in the trade and investment facilitation and liberalization. And fifth, they have highly appreciated the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And this has a huge potential for furthering our economic and trade collaboration with more developing countries. For this review, as I have mentioned before, it's a very good platform for communication and dialogue. On this platform, people can raise questions and try to avoid further misunderstanding. Also, during this conference, the member states have raised their concerns and also their attention about the SOE, surplus of productivity, surplus of the trade, as well as the TPR protection. We have given them written answers or the oral answers during the conference. We have cleared some of the doubts, and we have helped to deepen their understanding about our country's situation. Due to the limited time of the review, which is only for a duration of 2 to 3 days, we cannot cover all the questions during the conference. So we'd like to continue to further our communication with the other member states within the framework of WTO. That is my briefing about the WTO's 8th TPR of China. And together with my colleague, Mr. Yan Dong, the DG of WTO Affairs, I'd like to take your questions. Now the floor is open for your questions. Thank you. I'm from CCTV. What is China's view on WTO's 8th TPR of China, and what is the result achieved by the TPR? Just now, I have already briefed about this TPR. According to the rules, every 3 years we will experience one TPR from WTO. So the 7th one is run in 2018. This is a routine work, but it has very diversified content, and we have achieved fruitful results, and we have also attained expected level. We can also see from the TPR, that's the third pillar of the WTO, is still working very well. All the member states have attached great importance to this eighth TPR. Despite the impacts from COVID-19, still we have gathered online. 65 member states have sent their representatives to speak during the conference, and we have received a record high of questions, as much as 2,562. That is 16% higher than the number of questions we received in 2018 during the 7th TPR. This time, it's still a very successful TPR. We have received abundant and diversified questions. First of all, questions related to WTO, like the goods trade. We are interested in the questions about liberalization and facilitation of trade and investment. And for the services, people are curious about the law on online security, and they would like to know whether the latest policies are always in accordance with the regulations of WTO. And for the TPR protection, and also for the rulings of the cases related to TPR protection, they would like to know whether we can reveal all the details about the cases and whether the rulings go along with the regulations of WTO. And beside that, we also have received other questions outside of the framework of WTO, from which we can see their hope and expectations. For example, they would like that China open further the market and also to narrow the negative list for market access, and also the further expansion of some pilot policies across the country. We can fully understand their concerns and expectations. They would like to enter the pilot free trade zone. Now we know that the pilot free trade zones, they only have limited coverage of services. Whether we can expand this policy across the whole country, we should wait and see. China is the largest trading country among 120 member states within WTO. We can fully understand the interests and concerns of the other countries. And for this times, the 8th TPR, we have realized several results. First of all, we have seized this opportunity to explain our policies to the rest of the world. Before the conference, we have prepared a declaration by the Chinese government of more than 20,000 characters, in which we have briefed the rest of the world's latest development of our new policies. From this report, you can see the determination of our further reform and opening up. And also the Secretariat of the WTO, they have also prepared another report in the name of the Secretariat. So from the report of the Chinese government and that of the Secretariat, the other member states can have a better understanding of the changes and improvements of the Chinese trading policy since the 7th TPR. And another realization, another achievement is that we have clarified our policies to the member states. Some of the member states, they are not very clear about the tendencies and directions of our current and emerging policies. For example, today we have proposed the dual circulation, the fostering of a new development paradigm. They are not very clear about this policy. They are worrying about a slowing down of the opening up of China. Actually, today we are grounding our efforts in the new development stage. We are applying new development philosophy. It doesn't mean that we will close our doors of the country and only focus on the domestic market. And also, some countries are worrying about a enforced transfer of the technology. So we explained to them that in 2020, we have newly adopted some laws and regulations. For example, the licensing law and foreign investment laws. In those legal documents, you can see that the administrative bodies of the government and the personnel working inside included, they should not use administrative measures to force the transfer of technologies. And the third result is at this time, more than 60 government departments have participated in the preparation of the report and also the answering of this questionnaire. This can, in return, help us to better improve our practices and policy elaboration. So in the future, we know how to better rationalize our relationship in doing trade with the other member countries of the WTO, and we can avoid in the future more conflicts. And this time, the 8th TPR has further strengthened the recognition of the WTO's value by its member states. And for this function of the TPR by the WTO, it's more widely recognized by its member states. Today, in this difficult time, this work of TPR can absolutely help to consolidate our confidence in the work of WTO. Thank you. I'm from the Phoenix Group. We know that this time we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of entrance into WTO, while the 8th TPR of China. But some people are still saying that China has not yet fully fulfilled its commitments to the WTO. What is your explanation to that? Yes, indeed, this year is the 20th anniversary of China's entrance into WTO. We have signed an entrance protocol, and also we have also signed the work group report during our entrance into WTO. The two documents have made it clear what are our obligations to fulfill after our entrance into WTO. And we also had set a timetable. If you have this timetable in hand, you can see clearly that we have already fulfilled all the obligations defined by the WTO. All the promise we have made to WTO, we have turned it into reality. Several Director General of WTO and the vast number of member states have widely and highly appreciated China's fulfillment of its engagement to WTO. Some examples for you. For example, for our alignment with the WTO rules. After joining WTO, we have to modify our laws and regulations so that our laws can be aligned with that of the WTO. We have, for example, at central government level, more than 2,000 documents revised, and at local government, we have 190,000 regulations and laws revised. So from this example, you can see that the whole system of law and regulation in China now is in correspondence and alignment with WTO rules. After our entrance into WTO, we make sure that we have the laws and regulations in alignment with WTO's rules. And while elaborating new laws and new policies, we also see to that the new laws and regulations can also match the demand of WTO. And second, for the opening of our domestic market, for the goods, we have promised to WTO that for the tariff of the goods will be cut down to 8.9%. The level before the entrance is 18.3%, and now it's down to 8.9%. We have realized this promise, and today the average level of the tariff of China's importation of goods is only around 7%. That is lower than most of the developing countries. It's almost the level of the developed countries. For the services trade, we have further opened our market. For the trading services, we have followed the guidance and the rules in the protocol and work team report. By 2007, we should open 9 categories of services. with about 100 small items, and today we have already exceeded that number. Today we have already set up a legislative system that is in alignment with the rules. But now you may wonder whether China has obeyed this law. Actually, yes. At central level and local government level, we have set up the courts for the protection of the TPR protection, for example. So we have not only the rules to protect the TPR, the IPR, but also we have the law enforcement bodies to ensure that the IPR can be better protected in China now. We are also briefing the WTO bodies and also the member states the latest developments and improvements of our improvements and progress. But one declaration is hard to make, the subsidies declaration. How much subsidies we have issued to support the enterprises and the individuals is very hard to declare. This is a consensus among all the countries, but China has overcome all these difficulties. For example, this year, by July, we have reported our subsidies conditions and status quo to WTO about the period from 2019 to 2020. And for the conflict settlement, WTO has already made a lot of rulings. Whether China has abided by that? Yes. Some of the verdicts are favorable to China and some others are not. Whether it's favorable or not to us, we will always accept the verdicts from the rulings of WTO. There's no single case that China has rejected the verdict from WTO. So from these examples, you can see how we have aligned our systems of laws and regulations and also abide by the law. And also, as I have mentioned before, some other member states have also presented their concerns and wishes. And those questions are not mandatory within the framework of WTO. And in this case, I think that we should not force China to apply all those expectations of the other member states. For example, for some issues of the IPR protection, some member states are expecting more results than what WTO made it mandatory. So maybe we have to further communicate on those issues. In general, whether for the member states or the several director generals, they have all highly appreciated what China has accomplished over the past years. Next question, please. I'm from CGTN. As is mentioned by Mr. Wang, for the declaration about the subsidies, we know that subsidies is a hot topic in the reform of the WTO. Some countries are asking for more strict measures about the subsidies. Whether China will join the negotiations about the further policies about the subsidies and how China will make its subsidies distribution more transparent. I'll give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Yan Dong. Thank you very much for your question. Subsidies are a common policy tool used by the governments of all countries. When the market is not functioning very well, then we can use the subsidies to stabilize the market, stabilize the job opportunities, and also to support the development of the technologies. Especially after COVID-19, all the member states of WTO have issued a lot of policies for subsidies to help their enterprises to tide over the difficult time and also to stabilize the society and help the people out. For the subsidies to industrial products, there is the protocol from WTO. It's called the subsidy and counter-subsidy. And for agricultural, there is also the protocol for the agricultural subsidies. For those two protocols, there are very detailed prescriptions about the distribution of the subsidies. For the subsidies and counter-subsidies, from this protocol, you can see that for the imported goods, when they are subsidized and they are casting a negative impact on the domestic products in the destination country, then the destination country can adopt a counter-subsidy measure. The two documents, the two protocols have come into effect since the 1990s. In general, it's working very well, but sometimes we can encounter some challenges. For example, the lack of equality and rationality in the application of the subsidies in agriculture. In some developed countries, now according to the rules, they can apply a much higher level of the subsidies into agriculture. And sometimes there is the abuse of the counter subsidies measures. In some of the rules from the protocol can no longer reflect the current needs and expectations of the workers and the personnel. So we think it's very necessary to start the reform of WTO. We are very open for the negotiation about the subsidies. We have three major proposals. First of all, the agricultural subsidies should enter the topic of the negotiations so that the agricultural products can compete with the industrialized product. And second, for the anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures, we have to rule their application in case of the abuse. And third, in the case of COVID-19, and also in face of the climate change, we have to allow some policy execution room for the related countries. For the anti-subsidies measures, the WTO urges its member states to report their policies concerning those two parts, agricultural subsidies and industrialized product subsidies, on a regular basis. China has fulfilled its duties in this regard, and according to the demand of WTO, we have handed over 2 reports about the anti-subsidies reports. And in comparison, some developed countries, they have delayed their report by several months, and some even are still procrastinating about the handing over of the reports. I'm from Shenzhen TV. During the moment, China's entrance into WTO, the GDP of China represented only 8% of the world's total, and today this number has been more than doubled. Yes, indeed, we have applied a reform and policy for many years under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee. the people in this nation has stick to the basic national policy of reform and opening up. After a few decades of hard efforts and work, the socio-economic development of China has made a huge move forward, and we have also significantly improved people's livelihoods. At the same time, there are still some problems in our country. For example, the inequality in the development. During the 19th CPC Congress, in the report it is said that China remained the largest developing country in the whole world. This status quo has not changed. You have also mentioned the special treatment and differentiated treatment. According to WTO, for the developing countries, during their stage of development, they can enjoy the special and differential treatment. The rights and obligations should be decided after the negotiations. According to the statistics of the Secretariat of WTO, currently, as to the special and differential treatment, we have 155 articles concerning trading opportunities, guaranteeing of the rights of the member states, protection of the policy rules, transition period, technological assistance, and flexibility to the least developed countries. In total, 6 categories and 155 articles. For a certain protocol, WTO may urge the developed countries to apply them immediately, but they would give 5 years of window time to the developing countries. So that is what we call the special and differential treatment. Some member states may think that China, after its fast development, should abandon its differential treatment. I will give you the explanation. After our entrance into WTO in 2001, we uphold the principle of respecting the facts, and we believe that there should be a balance between rights and obligations. According to those two principles, today we are assuming the responsibilities that corresponds to our status quo, and we are striking a balance between the rights and obligations. After the entrance of China into WTO, we have enjoyed a lot of rights, but compared to the other developing countries, we have fewer rights than the other developing countries during their entrance. And after our entrance into WTO, we have never used the special and differential treatments as a shield or as an excuse to avoid doing something we don't want to do. Instead, we have made it very clear in our position. We have made positive contribution to the negotiations within WTO. For example, the agreement of WTO about the trade facilitation. In this document, there is the article about the differential treatment. It is said that for some C category measures, according to which developing countries will only assume these obligations after receiving the assistance from developed countries. And for these categories of obligations, China has not demanded assistance from the foreign developed countries. We have accomplished this task by ourselves. And also for a transitional period, according to the prescriptions of the WTO, for the developing countries, they can always enjoy a window time or a waiting moment of 5 years. and it's mandatory for the developed countries to apply them immediately. But for China, we think that some of the measures, if we can do it now, we will not wait for 5 years. We will not procrastinate. And also for the other negotiations, we have not used our privilege of the specific, special, and differential treatment. So we have contributed to the negotiation about the expansion of the IT technology. After our entrance into WTO, we are enjoying some special differential treatment, but compared to the other developing countries, all those treatments benefiting China are in a smaller amount. We are a responsible country, and we are the biggest developing country in the whole world, and we will continue to abide by this principle of balance between rights and obligations. And we will also use our special and differential treatment privilege only when necessary, and we can continue to work harder to safeguard this multilateral trading system of WTO.
There have been changes to the market in the form of a foreign investment law and better protection of IP rights. But the fact remains that there are still areas that are out of bounds to foreign investment, and there is preferential treatment for state-owned enterprises. And this has come under criticism from other members during the review. So what is China going to do to rectify this? Thank you.
谢谢，来自新加坡海峡时报。我的问题呢是关于下面一个情况，就是在中国入世20年之后，中国呢颁布了新的外资法。
This is the Chinese translation of the question.
知识产权的保护，但是呢，有一些人士呢依然觉得中国还有一些这个领域是不向这外资开放的，国有企业仍然获得了差别的待遇。同时呢，中国也没有兑现曾经承诺过的一些这个改革。想问一下您对这些问题请作何回应？谢谢。
好，谢谢你的提问。我刚刚在前一个问题回答时候已经强调。
Thank you very much for this question.
世贸组织加入过程中所做出的承诺。
During the previous question, I already said that
不存在。
The promises and engagements China made during its entrance into WTO, we have already fulfilled all of them. There's no single engagement left behind. You have mentioned the SOE of China benefiting from special treatment. You have also mentioned that some areas are not open to the foreign investment. So for the special treatment to the SOE, according to the Constitution of China, according to the 16th article, within the framework of the law, SOE of China has the right to run their own business. The SOEs will run on their own, and they are independent market entities that are responsible for their gains and losses. They are like the other market players. They are playing on the same level playing ground. This is the prescription from the Constitution of China. And in recent years, we have also worked very hard on the mixed ownership reform of the SOEs. Until now, for the enterprises owned by the central government, 70% and more of them have a mixed ownership. So that means the SOE has 70% of a mixed ownership. And the listed companies, they are a major way for the reform of mixed ownership for SOEs. For the listed companies controlled by SOEs, the asset volume represents 67% of the SOEs and central level controlled enterprises. So from this proportion, you can see that among the SOEs and centrally controlled enterprises, a lot of them are listed companies. They have the annual report or they can give you the report on the enterprise operation every 6 months, whether they have received the subsidies from the central government, from their seasonal or the annual report. You can see that they are not benefiting from the so-called special treatment. They are running on their own in the market. You have also mentioned the foreign investment law in China, which has already come into effect. But we have heard some criticism. For some areas, the access of foreign investment is still forbidden. Actually, we are enlarging the market access to foreign investment. This is a voluntary choice by China. It's not a mandatory obligation from WTO. For investment, WTO has only made one decision. It's called TRIMS. In this agreement, all the articles of obligations cited inside China has fulfilled all of them. But now you may be wondering why some areas we cannot accept foreign investment. Actually, this does not belong to the mandatory obligation by the WTO. So we are free to make our choices. And it's not only China. Many other countries also hold some areas forbidden to the foreign investment. We can understand that some foreign investment, they have expectations to enter these currently forbidden areas, and these will require more negotiations in the future. For example, our investment agreement between China and the other European countries. Through the free trade agreement or the bilateral investment and trade agreement, we can further enlarge opening up and also to eliminate the further limitations on the entrance of foreign investors. Through the bilateral investment agreement or the free trade agreement, China can work with the other country. The CPTPP is a very high requirement for the investment, and China has decided to join it. As to those areas now forbidden to the foreign investors, you cannot say that China is violating the obligations defined by WTO. You cannot use it as an excuse to criticize China. It's not just, and we cannot accept that. So to answer your question, China has fully assumed its responsibilities and obligations after the entrance into WTO. And SOEs, they have the right to run independently. That is according to the Constitution of China. And for the investment, we also have fulfilled the obligations required by WTO. And for the negative list for market access for investment, in Shanghai, in the pilot free trade zones, we have applied 190 items. And now it's down from 190 items to only 30 items. So you can see how fast we are progressing forward. We also would like to use the free trade agreement or the bilateral trade and investment agreement to work with more partners.
谢谢发言人。央广经济之声记者提问。那么再过1个月，世贸组织将举行第12届部长级会议，
And
其中
from
的渔业补贴
economic
是关键
voice,
问题之一。
in
那么
1
请问目
month,
前谈判进展如何？
WTO will organize the 12th ministerial meeting. The subsidies into the fishing sector will be a topic of the negotiation. What is China's effort in helping the negotiation to achieve its results? I will give the floor to my colleague, Yan Dong. Thank you very much. Subsidies to the fishery has received a lot of attention from the whole world because it's related to the sustainable development of the fishery industry and also protection of the environment. Member states of the WTO started by 2001 the Doha negotiations, including the fisheries subsidies. With the new rules, we would like to crack down the illegal fishing and also to fight against the irrational subsidies. With these new policies, we can sustain the development of the fisheries. However, due to the Doha round negotiations and also the differences in the interests of the countries and also differences of their resources, possessions, we have spent a lot of years. Until now, it's 20 years in the negotiation, but still now we have not yet yielded a conclusion about the subsidies to the fisheries. In an article of WTO, we have set an objective to conclude the negotiations of the subsidies about the fisheries by 2022. And now all the parties have agreed that during the 12th ministerial meeting of the WTO, we will conclude the negotiation about the fisheries subsidies. And this conclusion of negotiation will be the contribution of the WTO to the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development goals. It can help to realize the sustainable development of the fishing sector, and it can also help to foster the multilateral trade system. Currently, the negotiations of the fisheries subsidies is in its most crucial stage. China has played a very active role in the negotiations. In order to promote the realization of the result of the negotiation, we have proposed a lot of plans for the deliberation for the member states, and we hope that in an earlier date we can conclude this negotiation. As a developing country and also a big fishing country, during the negotiations, China will assume its responsibilities and shoulder its responsibilities and obligations corresponding and in alignment with its rights. China has also diligently worked to realize the sustainable development goals of the UN. For example, for the total number of the fishing boats, we control the number. We also have the seasons of non-fishing. We also have measures in place to cultivate the species in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. We also crack down very severely the illegal fishing. For the fisheries subsidies, we have made a lot of modifications. This May, the Ministry of Finance and MARA have co-published the document about the supporting policies to the development of the fishery sector. It's the document number 41 between the two ministries. According to this document, it is said that we will follow the trend of negotiations of the WTO to support the sustainable development of the fisheries. And one highlight of the policies is to abolish the
更加
subsidy
强调绿
to
色发
the
展，保障民生和资源养护，推动渔业高质量发展。
fuels to the fishing
中
boat.
国坚定支持
This
多
is a
边贸易体
measure
系，也
to
支持在世贸
guide
组织
the
第
fishermen
12届部长级会议之前
to follow a
尽
path
快
of
完成
sustainable
渔业谈
fishing and
作为负责任渔业大
a
国，中
environmentally
国正
friendly
在
fishing
并将
development.
继续以实际行动
As a
支持
responsible
禁止
country
助长过剩
of
捕捞
fishing,
和过度捕捞
China
有
will
害
use
渔
its
业
own
谢
actions
谢。
to curb the development of excessive productivity, and also we will support the sustainable
谢谢
development
主
of
持
this
人
fishing
澎湃新闻记者
sector.
提问。中国已加入 RCEP， 也正在寻求加
Thank
入
you. I'm from
CGTN。
the paper.
请问商务部如何看待
We have
区贸易
already
协
joined
定与 WTO 的
RCEP,
关系？
and
另
we are
外
about to
未来
embrace the
多边协定是否会代替
CPTP?
多边协定成为国际经贸关系的主流？
What
谢谢。
is the future relationship between
好，
China
谢谢
and
你
the
的提问。这个我们认为
WTO,
啊，多边
and
贸易体制和区域
will this trend of
自贸协定的安排
multinational
是驱
trading
动
system
经济
be
全
the
球
future
化
trend?
以及国际贸易、
Multilateral
国际投资自由化、便利化的
trade
这个两
and
个轮子
also the free
那么这
trade
两个轮子是相互
agreement
促进
will
的，
be
这
the
个
two
不
major
可偏废的，不
pillars
能
to
够
support
缺
the
缺少这种任务都不
facilitation
是
and liberalization of
那么
investment and
多边
trade.
贸易体制呢，以
We
世贸组
cannot
织
bear
为
to
核
lose
心，
either of
它可
them.
以说是推动
Multilateral trading
全球
system
贸易
has
自由化、便
WTO
利
at
化
its
进程
core.
的一个基础，是一个
It is
核心的平台。
promoting the
大家知
liberalization
道世贸
and
组织有164
facilitation
个
of world
成员，
trade and investment.
他们
WTO
所
is the
占的
major
贸易额
platform.
他们的贸易
WTO
占
has
到全球的贸易额
164 member
是
states.
达到了
Their
98%
trade
以上，
volume
所以没有
accounts
任何一个
for
协定能够达到这样的一个水平。
more than 98% of the world's total.
世界上
So
绝大
no
多数的
single
贸易
agreement
都是
in the
在
whole world
世
can
贸组
reach
织成员
such
之
a
间
high
进
level.
行的。比如说中
So the
国，
majority
我
of
们
the
去
trade
年是4.65万亿
is
美
realized
元的进出口
between
额。那么我
among
们
the
和
member
世贸组
states
织成
of
员之间的贸易额
WTO.
呢是多少呢？达到了97.9%，就是我们的4.65万
For
亿
example,
美元的
last
外
year,
贸
China's foreign trade
有
volume reaches
4.56万亿是和
4.65
世贸组织成员
trillion
进行的。
US dollars, among which 97.9% of
所以
this foreign trade is realized between
坚持
China and the
多边
other
贸易体制，
WTO
支持
member
多边
states.
贸易体制的发展，维护多边贸易
So
体
we
制
will
的
stick to the
有效性、
mechanism
权威
of
性。
multilateral trade, and we support its development, and we will safeguard
那么
the
区域自由贸易协
authority
定的安排
and
它我们认为
effectiveness of this
是
multilateral
自贸
trading system
是
and the
WTO
regional
多边贸易体制的有
free
力的
trade
补充。
agreement.
它
We
并
believe
不
that
是
it's
和 WTO 相
a
冲
very
突、相矛盾的。
helpful and
自贸协定
favorable
一般都是
supplement
WTO
to
加
the WTO
WTO
system
plus
and multilateral
就是
trading
它不
system.
仅仅
They are
自贸
not
协定不仅仅包括
contradicting
货
with
物
each other.
贸易的开放，不仅仅包括服务贸易
The
的
free
开
trade
放，
agreement,
它还包
FTA,
括投资领
is
域的开放。
concerning not only the
而且
opening of the
在货物
trading
贸易、
goods
服务
and
贸易
services, but also the
开放的
opening
水
of
平
the
要比
investment
WTO 的开放
for the
水平要高得
trading
多。
goods and
WTO 对投
services.
资开放没有规定，而自贸协定是
They
有规定
have a higher level
除了
of
在
opening
市
up.
场开放、市场准入方面，自贸协定是
WTO
WTO
has
加
no mandatory
在规则方面
requirements for the opening of the investment, but with the
也规定了一
FTA,
些
they do have the
WTO 还
rules.
没有做出规定的领域，包括比如说
And also
电
with
子
the
商务，包
FTA,
括数字经济，
they have
包
made
括
some of
这
the
个
new
知识
contents
产
very
权的一
clear,
些
which
保护
is
等
not
等方面，
concluded
就是
in the rules and
自贸协定
regulations
的
of
这个规则
WTO. For
领域内的
example, the
水平
protection
也比
of the
WTO 要
IPR
高得多，
and
有的是
also the
WTO
digital
所没有
economic
的。
development.
所以我们可以看出来，
So within the
这个区域
FTA,
贸
we
易
have a
协
higher
定它的
level
贸
of
易
opening
自
up.
由化、便利
And
化水
some
平
of the
更高，
contents
甚至
concluded
它
by
涉
the
及到
side
投
of
资领域，
this FTA is not
它还涉及到
concluded
规
by the
则领
framework
域
of
可
WTO.
以
So
认为
not
是
only for the
这些
opening of this
新规则的
services
试
and
验
goods
田，
trade, but also
这些试验
with
田
the
如果产生的成果
investment.
今后被 WTO 所采用，
It's
那对
kind of we
全球
have
贸易、
somewhere
投
to
资的
do
自由
some
化、便利化
experiments.
是非常
If in the future those experimental trials can be adopted by the WTO, it can further help to liberalize and facilitate the trade and investment in the whole world. Those are the advantages of the free trade agreements, FTA. But still, we have to recognize that we cannot replace the WTO by the FTAs. In your questions, one journalist has mentioned the question about the subsidies. The FTA has only limited effect for the settlement of disputes about the subsidies, for food security, for the stockage of the public food, etc. All those issues cannot be solved by FTA, only by the multilateral trading system on the framework of WTO. That is number one. And number two is that the FTA is usually signed between two countries or a few number of countries. It's more number of a few countries. For example, today we have witnessed 350 different FTAs. This is what we call the effect of the spaghetti. For example, country A has signed at the same time the FTA with country B and C, and all those FTAs are intertwined. If it is within the framework of WTO, then we only have one very clear document applied to all the member states. So with this multilateral trading system within the WTO, we can easily solve the problem known as the effect of spaghetti. For China, we have attached great importance to this multilateral trading system, and we are supporting this development. We would like to contribute to the development of an open economy in the whole world. President Xi has mentioned in the 19th CPC Congress report that China supports the development of multilateral trading system of WTO and also the development of FTA, the free trade zones. So in this regard, our ministry will work on the directions of President Xi and firmly support the multilateral trade system. We have also published the White Book, and by November 2018, we have published a document declaring our position towards the reform of WTO, and later on we have proposed our suggestions about WTO's reform, and later on in Shanghai, we also have organized a small ministerial meeting to discuss the issues of WTO's reform. And for the principle of openness, inclusiveness of WTO, we will always respect that, and at the same time, we will also actively join the negotiations of the FTA discussions and negotiations. RCEP is what we have signed with the other 14 countries. Next year, by the beginning of the year, it will come into force. Recently, CPTPP will officially join CPTPP, and this is a recent official announcement. In total, China has already joined more than 20 FTAs, but whether for FTAs or the multilateral trading system, we have to know that they are complementary pillars. We cannot say either of them will be the mainstream forever. Maybe during a certain period of time, one side of it will play a bigger role, but you have to admit that both of them are equally important, and they are the two pillars that support the world's economic development. Next question, please.
My question is that it seems there was a lot more criticism of China this time at the review than at the 7th review last time. Please tell us your thoughts on the criticisms from Japan, the US, the EU, Australia, and other nations. Were they justified anywhere, and will you be making any changes in answer to those criticisms? Thank you.
谢谢，来自彭博新闻社。此次贸易审议过程中，来自日本、欧盟和美国以及其他成员的代表提出了对中国贸易政策的一系列批评。请问中方认为这些批评是否足够合理？
好，谢谢你的提问。我先请这个燕东司长回答一下。
好，谢谢你的提问。其实
Thank you. First of all, I give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Yan Dong. Thank you.
王部长呢已经做了比较详细的回答。
As you have mentioned,
中国加入承诺的部分，因为这次审议成员的问题和关注
there are some criticisms, and actually my colleague, Vice Minister Wang, has already answered to that question, especially for the fulfillment of engagement by China. China is the major trading partner of more than 120 countries in the whole world, so the rest of the world is looking at China's policies of trade and commerce. Before the meeting with the WTO, for more than 2,100 questions, we have given written responses. And during the conference, for some specific questions of the member states, we have clarified and answered. I believe that those two-way interaction and communication proved to be very effective. And from this interaction, you can see the value of this TPR. Of course, we will carefully study the concerns and the interests of the other member states, and we expect to further communicate with those member states in other cases and scenarios. I would like to add up something. There are some complaints or comments from some member states. They have raised a lot of questions and criticism even about China. China will take it seriously. But all those comments, opinions, and criticisms can be divided into two parts. First, questions related to the requirements of WTO. For all those complaints and comments, we will study more carefully the requirements of WTO to see where are the places we can change and we can improve. Those are questions within the framework of WTO obligations. And there is also the second part of questions. As I have mentioned, some of the questions, they are out of the range of WTO obligations. You can only say it's the hope or expectations of the other member states from WTO. If you ask China to fulfill these duties that are not required by WTO itself, it's not justified, we believe. For all those obligations required by WTO, of course we will live up to it, but for the other requests or even criticism, I think you should not take it to the stage of WTO. Thank you. I'm from Fangmian News. Some countries say that there are non-market-based activities, and there's the distortion of the market. There's too much interference from the Chinese government into its market activities. What is your comment? Thank you very much for this question. In other scenarios, we hear similar questions. For the non-market-based behaviors, let's go back to the fundamentals, the Constitution of China. In Article number 15, it is stipulated that China runs a socialist market economy. After the reform and opening up, especially after the 18th CPC Congress, we have improved our socialist market economic system. This progress is always
价格、服务价格是市场决定的。
Developing, 97% of the goods and services are decided by the markets.
是谁定的？是比较完整
We
的市
have
场化的
also
体系。
a very complete
市场
system
化的机制也在不断地
of
完善
the interest rate
土地
decided by the
劳动
markets.
力、资本、技术、数据
And this mechanism
这些
for
要
the
素是
formulation
在
of
不断地推进。
exchange rate is also
那么
decided
同
by
时
the
呢，
market.
就是中国在建设
And
高
at the
标准
same
的市
time,
场
for
体系
some
全面实施
elements for labor,
负面清单
like the
市
land,
场准入负
we're
面清单
also
是怎么
doing
做
the reform.
有些
Today, we're
准入是
also
由政府要
applying
审
the
批
negative list for market
有一些
access.
政府审批之外的都是自
For
由
some
准
of the market access, it should be approved
那么
first by the government.
我们还健全公
If you are
平竞
not
争
in
的
the
审
list,
查
then
机
you
制
are free to
加
go
强
into this
反
market.
反不正当竞争执法
At the same time,
查法
we have
普
this
遍适应
approval
各类
system
市场
that is
所以
very
在市场
that
准
is
入
treating
和退出
everyone
要素的
equally.
使用、产权的保护等方面都消除
All
了
the
壁垒，
market players,
形
they
成
are
了
treated equally.
公平竞
In
争
this
的市
case,
场环境。
we have
2020
moved
年
away the
5月份
barriers, so
我
we
们
have
还发布
created
了
this
关于新时
equal
代
playing
加快
ground in the
完善社
market.
会主义市场经济体制的意见。这个意见提出来，
This
中
May,
国
we
坚
have
持
also
社会主义市场
published
经
the
济改革
documents,
方
the
向
opinions
更加
of
尊重
improving the
市场经
socialist
济的一
market
般规
economy
律
in China.
最大限度
It
减
is
少
said
政
in
府
this
对市场
document that we
资
stick
直接
to
配
the
置
direction
和
of
对微
socialist
观
market
经济活动
economy.
的
We
直接
respect
干
the
预
rules of the
充分
market's
发挥
operation.
市场
We
在
will
资源配置
minimize
中的
the
决定性作用，
direct
有效弥补
intervention
市
by
场
the Chinese
失
government
灵。
into
所
the
以大家可
operation
以
of the
看出来
market.
中国的市场经济它的水平。那在这样的这个市
But
场经济
when the
中，
market is
非市场的贸易
not
行为
doing very well,
还
and then the government
多吗？
will give a helping hand.
政府对经济的干预活动还有
From
那
all
么多吗。
those examples, you can
你
see
提到了
that
这个关于产能过剩的问题。
people have exaggerated a bit about
是
those
经济发展中普遍性、周
non-market-based
期性、结构性的
behaviors
问题，
and
是
also
全球
for
面临
the
的一个共
excessive
同的挑战，
productivity.
需要各方面
This
共同
is a
的应对。
problem related
比如说，
to
大
the
家
cycle of economic development
都关
and
注
is
的
also
前
related
一
to
段
the
时间的
structural
这个钢铁产能过剩的问题。
status quo.
那么钢铁
This
产
is a
能过剩
common
根源
issue
是2008
for
年全
all
球金融
countries in
危
the
机
whole
引
world.
发的这个供需失
Earlier
衡。
this year,
中
we
国
have
为了解决
noticed
这个
the
钢铁产能
excessive
过剩做出了
development
巨大
and
的
productivity of the
付出了
steel.
巨大的代价。
And the root cause
实
of
际上呢，
this
中国是相关国家
is
中化解过剩产能
could be
努力
date
最大
back
效
to
果
the
最
year
好的国家。
2018. By
这
then,
个
there's a
我们在
huge
2015年
lack
推进
of
供给侧
balance
结构
of
改革以
demand
来
and supply for
在
the
去产
steel.
能方面取得的效果也是非常显著的。
And back to
在审议的时
2015,
候
we have already started the supply
参
side
议的代
structural
表就问这
reform.
个问题。
This
那
is
么
a
我们解
very
释到，
effective
就是在
measure
2018年到
for us to
2020
cope
年，
with
中
this
国累计压
surplus
缩
of
粗钢
productivity.
的产
Some
能
members have
1.5 亿
also raised this
现在
question.
中国的粗钢的产能利用率是80%以上，
For example, for the
铝行业的产能利用率是85%以上，所以在这两
raw
个行业已
steel,
经没有
we
产
have
能过
cut
剩，
significantly
而且我们
the
对未来
production volume
是否出现产能过剩保持着高度
for
的
the
警惕。
aluminum and also for the steel. There is no longer this problem of surplus of
来建立完
productivity.
善化解产能过剩的这个
We
产
will
效体系。
always be oriented by the market,
随着中国
and
特色
we
社会主
will
义进入
be
新时
abiding
代，
by the law so
那
that
我
we
们
can
将
set
深
up
入
a
贯
very
彻新
effective
发展理
market
念，加
system.
快构建
Now
消
we
费
have
秩序，
entered
推动
into
高质量发
a
展。
new
将
stage
坚定
of
不移地呢
socialism
深
with
化市
Chinese
场化改革，
characteristics. We will
扩
ground
大
our
高水
effort
平
in a
开发，
new
构建
development
高
stage,
水平的社
apply
会
new
主义
development
市场经济体
philosophy,
制。那
foster
么在这
a
个过
new
程之中，
development
我们也
paradigm
会认真
so that we can
地一如
form
既
this
往
high
地
level
履
of
行加入
socialist
世贸组织的
economy.
承诺，对
During
各
this
类所有制
process,
企业
we
一视
will
同仁，
work as
向中外企业呢
usual
提供公
to
平开
abide
放
by the
的营商环境。谢
regulations
谢。
of WTO, fulfill our engagements,
好，大家还有
and
问题吗？
offer this
好，最后一个问题，这位记者。
level playing ground to the
谢谢
foreign
香港工程社记
investors.
者提
Last
问
question
在
for the
世贸
day.
组织第8次对华贸易政策审议中，
Thank you. I'm
成
from
员
the
高
China
度赞
review.
赏中方在坚定维护多边
During
贸易体制，
WTO's
推
8th
动世贸
TPR of
组织中
China,
发
the
挥的
member
作用。
states have
请问
highly
日后中国
appreciated
在经
China's efforts in safeguarding the multilateral trading system and its participation in the WTO's reform? What is China's future role? Thank you
加
very
强它的
much
权
for
威
your
性有效性
question.
是非常重视
As
的。
is mentioned
这
before,
个
China
对它的
has
改革也是非常重视的。
contributed
习
to
近
the
平主席
authority of
支持
WTO, and we
中
have
方呢
also
支
attached
持
great
对
importance
世贸组
to
织
the
进行
WTO's
必要的
reform.
改革。
According to President
改革的目
Xi,
的是与时俱进，
China
使其
supports
更加有
the
效地践
necessary
行开
reform
放
on
市场，促进发
WTO
展的宗旨。
in order
改革的
to
结
keep
果
up with the
应当
times
有助于
and
维
so
护
that
自由贸
the
易的多边场
WTO can
收窄
further
发展
promote
空
the
间，
liberalization and the facilitation of trade and service trade and
那么
commerce,
就具体
and we
改
can
革来
also
说呢，我
narrow
想
the
给大家做这样的
development
介绍。第一
gap.
呢，就是说
This
在
is
改
our
革的议
basic
题
standing
方面，
point.
我
And
们
for the
认为呢，世
reform,
贸
more
组织改革
details.
既要
First of all, the
这个
topics
解
about the
决传
reforms.
统的议题，解决历史
For
的
this
欠
reform
账，
of
也
WTO,
要
we
呢
believe that we
就
have
一
to
些新
solve
议题
some
制定规则
conventional
来
problems.
实现规则
At the
的现代
same
化。
time, we also
就是
have
在议题
to
方面
set up
既要
rules
有
for the
传
new
统的议
emerging
题解决
problems
历
so
史
that we
欠
can
账，也要
modernize
解决
this
这个
system of
一
rules.
些新议题，
So
制
both the
定一些新的
traditional
规则，实
and
现
the
规则的
modern
现代化。
issues should
比如
be
说传统议
considered
题里
during
面
this round of
非常重
reform.
要的一点，
We should not
就
only
是
solve the old
农业领
problems,
域
but also
在农业领域
keep an eye on the new
我们认为
issues. For
存在
traditional
着
issues,
非常不
agriculture
公平
is
的
a
对农业国
example.
际贸易严重
In
扭曲的
agriculture,
这个
there
补贴，
is
也
severe
就是
problem of
部分发达
inequality
成员享受
and
的
severe distortion
巨
caused
额的
by the
综
subsidies.
合支持量。
Some developed
这
countries,
个
they
综
are
合支持量补
enjoying
贴叫 AMS，
an enormous
这个
amount
aggregate
of
measurement of support。我请各位记者
subsidies.
对这个问题予以关注。比如说某一个国家，它的这
And
个
there's
综合
also the
支持
issue of
量的
AMS.
这个补贴，它非常大。它现在对，比如说对食糖的这个补贴，
Please pay attention to
糖啊
this.
食糖的补贴，
Some countries, they have a huge number of AMS.
65%。
For example, for
就
sugar,
卖一
edible
块钱
sugar,
6毛5是
the subsidies they are given,
它这个
they are given to the
补贴如果
sugar
用在
producer
棉花上，
and the other business
它可以补贴给
related
棉花，
is
它可以补贴到在
65%
这
of
个
the price
补贴水平可以
of
达
the
到
sugar
它
itself.
产值的280%，就它有个非常大的这个补贴
And
的
for cotton,
它有权利这样
the
做。
subsidies volume,
如
subsidies
果它想
amount
它可以
can
补贴到
even
棉花
reach the
产值的
208% of
那
its
么对发
product
展中国家
value.
在农业方面的补贴呢，大家都知道，发展中国家
For developing
是
countries,
10%，
agricultural subsidies, as you know,
就你补贴只能补贴产值的10%。
is only 10%.
那么这个补
They can
贴发
only
展中国
give
家
a
这个补贴呢，
level
有一个
of
专业术
subsidy
语叫
that
做微量
is equivalent to 10% of the product value.
叫 de minimis， 就是说这个
This
微
is
量
called the
允许
minimum allow
这个微量
de
允许呢
minimis.
它就占到它产值呢，就最多可以补贴10%。这个10%啊，它对贸易的扭曲作用是非常小的。
So the ceiling is 10% of the product value.
10%只补贴10%，它
10%
这个
cannot
对贸易的
distort
影
the
响是非
market
常小的。但
because
是
when
它对
developed countries
农
are
业产品的
doing
供给
65% or even up to 280% of subsidies, developing countries they are only doing 10% of the
特
subsidies.
别是对一些小
10%
农
of
经济
subsidies will
对
never
农民的
distort the
生计
market,
还有
but
种粮食要卖
this
你补贴
10%
它不能够维持
is
它的生计
necessary or
也是
essential
至关
to the
重要的。
livelihood,
所以
to the
像农业这个传统议题，中国的立场就是要改革，
prices regulation in the market and also to the livelihood of the
对
small
贸易扭
farmers.
曲极为严
So
重
for
的
China,
综
we
合支
believe
持怎么
that
样应该尽快取消。
if we have to run
而
a
对
reform
这个
on the subsidies,
小农经济所
we
需要
have
的
to eliminate
对粮食
those
安全、农业安全
irrational,
所必须的微量
huge
的
amount
补
of
贴应该保
subsidies
留还有关于粮食的公
applied
共
by
安全
certain
储备
countries. And
在
for
这
the
方面也是
minimum
一个传统议题
allowable
也应该呢这
subsidies
个
to the small farmers
尽
to
快
help
谈
them
判达成一个
out
协议。
with their
同
daily
时呢，
living.
在
We
这个议
should
题
keep
上
it.
我们认为对一些新的议题啊，也应该予以关注。电子商务啊，投资啊，刚刚我
For
们
some
谈
new
到的投资
topics,
问题啊，投
we
资
also
便利化
have to
刚刚
pay
大家
attention to
几
like
位记者提到的
investment
渔业补
and
贴啊，这些问题我们应该在议题
e-commerce
前也应该尽快
and
达成
also the subsidies
这
to
是就是说在
fishing
议题选
sector.
择方面。
All those
第二呢，
topics
就是在这个
should
中方解
also
决机制方面，
be
我们说
concluded
WTO 3
into
个
our
中方
discussion.
解决是它的一个重要的
And
功能。
second, for
这
the
个
Dispute settlement.
机制是
Dispute settlement is one of the three major functions of WTO.
全球贸易
This
正常
one
秩
is
序
very
维
important.
护全球贸易
The
的正常
settlement of
秩序是非
disputes
常有意义的。
can
就是
help
如
to
果谁
rationalize the normal
非认为你
order
做得
of
不
the
对
global trade.
那怎么办？就去打官司，打官司，那么 B 如
If
果错了
A
，B 需要改
thinks
正。
B is not
如果没有这个
doing
正
the
当
right
解决机
thing,
制，
then they will go to
那
the
A
court.
和 B 之间出了问题怎么办？就会
If
出
the
现
verdict says
这
that
个丛林
B
法则，
should
出
correct
现
its
强权及中立，
actions, then B should follow the verdict.
这是
If we
非
don't
常
have this
不
court,
利的，
if
对
we
国际
don't
贸易发
have
展
a
是非常不利
body
的。那
to
非常遗憾的是呢，由于个别成员的
spell the verdict,
现在
then we will go
WTO
back
的
to the
终端解决机制遇到了危机，
old
特
days
别
where
是
there's
上述
only
机
the
构
rule of the
陷入
jungles,
瘫痪，
the law
所以
of the
我们认为改
jungles,
革要
and
尽快
only the strong
来
country, the
解
big
决
country,
这个上
can
述
have the
机构
say.
的问题，来
So
解
we
决终
believe
端
that
解
we
决
have
机
to
制。
accelerate this
中国
reform
对这个问题还是
process
非
of
常重视的，我
WTO
们
so
一直
that
支
WTO
持
can
要
play a
尽快
better role
恢复
in the settlement of
WTO 上述
disputes.
机构的
China
正
has
常的
also
运行。
attached great importance
现
to
在
this topic.
上述
We
机构陷
support
入困境了，
the
我们和
restoration
欧
of
盟啊，
its
还有其
three
他的
major
WTO
functions
成
of
员
WTO.
制定了一个建设了一个多方临时上诉仲裁安排。当然，这是一个临时的。我们也希
Together
望就是
with
说，贸易发
EU
生的纠纷要通过这些
We
第三
are
方两省
urging
制的方式
the
来处理这个纠
restoration
纷，
of
而不是
the body of
通过
appeal, the
这个
appealing
大
body
流
of the
行为来
WTO.
解决
We
贸
have
易
to
争
find a
这
way
是第
to
二个方面。第三个
settle
方面
all
呢，就是关
those
于操纵改革
disputes.
的
We
路
should
径。
never
那么
seek
改革的路径
bullying
呢，就是怎么改？
behaviors
那么
in
对一
solving
些
the
像传
problems.
统的议题，涉及到所有
And
成员
for
国的
the
这个议题，
paths
我
of
们
reforms,
是
how
支
can we
持
realize
按
the
照协商
reform
一致
for
的
the
原则
conventional
来
topics?
实施改革。
With all the member
那么对
states
一些新议
related,
题，
we
部分
have
的一些
to
新议题，比如
abide
说
by the
像这
rule
个电
of
子商务啊，
consensus.
像
For
这样的
some
新议
new
题，那么
topics,
我们认为
like the
呢，不是
e-commerce
所有的 WTO 成员都能
and
够接受这个规则，
the
一
others,
部分成
we
员接受，
believe
另外一
that
部分成员呢不能够接受。那我们也
it's not
持一个开放的态度，就是采用一个叫联合声明倡议。
a topic that we can receive the consensus of all the member states. So in this case, we have the joint statement initiative. Among certain countries, first of all, they can achieve this statement. They can set up some preliminary rules for the settlement of the issues in this topic. And in the future, gradually we can include more member states into the agreement. In general, China has attached great importance to the WTO reform. We're also willing to play a constructive and active role in this reform so that the effectiveness and authority of WTO can be strengthened. And like that, we can promote further the world economic growth and also contribute to the liberalization and facilitation of trade and investment. So that is the end of today's press conference. Thank you very much for joining us.